Today's video is going to be something a little bit different. I've been planning to do a takes commentary for a little while now. Essentially, I want to talk about a few different subjects that I either have a take on or I'm reacting to someone else's take on. And today I have three different items I want to discuss. Number one, because of course I'm a gamer and I follow a lot of what's going on in that community and sphere, Starfield. Now, I feel like overall, the reaction to the Starfield Direct was pretty positive. The game looks, in my opinion, absolutely fantastic. This is not a review of that, however. It's not a breakdown of that Direct and what went on there. Showed a ton of great gameplay. There's so much depth to this game that other attempts like No Man's Sky and others, Elite Dangerous, just could not match. I always describe No Man's Sky, which I actually think is quite a good game, but essentially I view it as vast as an ocean but shallow as a puddle. Essentially there's just great breadth to the game world and the options in it, a lot of, but the depth to the gameplay, it's just not there. Like you very quickly lose a actual direction and a point to what you're doing, and it becomes essentially Minecraft in space. Now, the gameplay loop in many other ways, you can have a lot of fun with it, some really cool options, but often I will dig in for a day or two and then I'll be like, okay, well, now what? Because I'll just find that I'm running around collecting resources. Anyways, Starfield is like if you took something like No Man's Sky, made it really realistic, and gave it, RPG depth, the depth of a Bethesda RPG like a Skyrim or a Fallout. It looks really great. I have seen some negativity regarding the game, though, of course, amplified by social media, especially Twitter. The negativity, some of it revolves around game performance, which honestly, I usually am the type of person who's like, oh, my games, they need to be 60 FPS. I want to feel like it's a smooth experience. Whenever I play a game, I turn it on performance mode if it's an option. Occasionally I'll flip over to like quality mode, just see what it looks like. There's many games though that, in my opinion, they run at 4K, 60 FPS, and they look fantastic, and I enjoy that. There's other games where I'm willing to put them on performance mode and play at 60 FPS, and that feels like a better experience. I hadn't even considered this when it came to Starfield while I was watching the Direct, because I was so engrossed in how immersive this world was and the amount of things to do and how far you could go, like what the scope of this game was. I didn't even consider, watching the video, it never like clicked in my mind, oh, that's 30 FPS on console, So that is something that is out there, is the performance thing. I would say I'm disappointed. I would prefer the game be 60 FPS, but Bethesda apparently made a conscious choice to focus on fidelity, and the game is supposed to be locked 30 FPS. As long as it's 30 FPS and you don't have it bogging down, and it looks like it did in the Direct, then I'm probably okay with that. However, I'm seeing a lot of negativity. I will say a lot of it seems to be coming from, we'll call it the other side of the aisle, the Sony fans side of things. Of course, they're going to find any reason to knock the game, mostly because they don't get to play it. So we'll just leave that there. There are some fans on the Xbox side that seem to have some issues with it, and in general, overall, there are people saying some stuff about like character faces, which I really don't think they're like all that bad, especially when you consider the type of game this is and the scope of the game. The character faces do not look bad. Obviously, this is not a game like Horizon Zero Dawn or something like that. A more focused, graphically focused thing on the characters. It's more graphically focused on the world and the things you're experiencing there, along with having a boatload of other options for your gameplay arc. So, and then there's a lot of flexibility with communicating with characters and how you interact with them. So there's just a few things there that were negative from people that I feel like they're non-factors, and I guess I just don't care. Starfield just looks like the game of the decade overall. Like when it comes to styles of play, options, the story depth, and how expansive the world is, just nothing really has matched what this game is trying to achieve. I feel like we wanted that with Cyberpunk, and Cyberpunk, while I enjoyed it and I think it's a great game, it was just never that. Starfield looks like it might actually live up to expectations. Now, there's a second thing here. I saw a tweet today on my second take from @DiscussingFilm on Twitter, and basically it was talking about how Neil Kirby, who is Jack Kirby's son, Jack Kirby, of course, was co-founder or co-creator at Marvel with, of course, Stan Lee. And I guess there's a documentary coming out about Stan Lee, and Neil Kirby has some issues with that documentary, and he's talking about how, and this is the quote from the tweet, he says, "Are we to assume Lee had a hand in creating every Marvel character? Are we to assume it was never the other co-creator that walked into Lee's office and said, 'Stan, I have a great idea'?" I find this to be a really weird statement and take, because obviously I have no published works or anything of that sort. But over the entirety of my teenage and like young adult life and in life in general, I was a very creative person, and I wanted to write novels for the longest time. I actually began writing short stories and did incredible amounts of note-taking and creation of worlds and characters. Just did a lot of world building, we'll call it that. I had a really great friend of mine. We created a character together. I've basically got like 3 best friends, and this guy was one of them. And we created characters and a whole like Star Trek storyline. A lot of it was my concept for the ship and some of the stories and settings, and a couple of the primary characters, like the captain and the first officer. However, I did this exact thing essentially. I would be the one that walked into the office of my friend and said, "Hey, I've got this idea." And then what happened? He consulted me on that. In fact, he created a character that essentially ended up a core component of my story universe. And his input greatly altered, for the better in most cases, my story concepts and my character concepts. And we built this thing kind of together. There's a reason why these people are called co-creators, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. The fact is, if they were working on this stuff together, the DNA of their ideas, they're both mixed together. So yes, if you are co-creators and your father, Jack Kirby, was walking into Lee's office and saying he has this great idea, you know what was happening then? Stan was listening to that idea, he was taking it in, and then he was turning around and providing input, and your dad was taking that input and he was molding his characters with that input. That's the whole point of a co-creative process. Just like it happened with my best friend and I, we were essentially co-creators of this Star Trek storyline. Of course, it branched out into many other things, but these characters and these settings and the ship and all those things. So I would fully expect that if it had ever become something and I passed down the road, that he would get full credit for being a co-creator on those things. I would probably make sure he did. It just makes sense. And Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, I don't know anything about their personal relationship besides the fact that they were co-creators, but I'm just reacting to this statement alone. It really is nonsensical. The setting he describes is literally a setting where Stan Lee would in fact have had a hand in creating those Marvel characters. So I find it kind of a weird take for him to have. Why not just accept the genius of both men and allow for it to be written essentially that your father's friend and co-creator of these things had a hand in what Jack Kirby was doing? Because I assume it would be the opposite as well, that everything that Stan Lee did, Jack Kirby probably had a hand in creating. So that's my second take. The third one here is something a little more on the personal line and entertainment. Obviously we've covered video games, we've covered kind of comic, Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Linkin Park. If you follow my Twitter feed, you know I am a massive Linkin Park fan. I have been since 2000, 2001. Linkin Park has been well, let's just say you pretty much could not remove me from the influence that Linkin Park has had on my life as I've grown. I mean, we're talking about 23 years of this music, and I'm in my mid-30s. So I was 12, 13 at the time that Linkin Park became a global phenomenon and influenced the lives of many, many millions of teenagers and young adults and whoever else came in contact with it and was able to relate. But my take here is something I was thinking of recently and discussing with the same best friend that I was just talking about, because he's also a fan of Linkin Park. He's a few years older than me too, so he was somewhat more exposed to things like Linkin Park and Static X and Kidney Thieves and Stabbing Westward and just all these great industrial, probably Korn and all those sorts of things as well, but the industrial and new metal and some of the grunge or post grunge, but like these genres of the late 90s, early 2000s that were a massive transitioning for rock into a new era. And yes, there were people who were doing new metal technically before Linkin Park, and while Linkin Park is considered new metal and in many ways is considered to have redefined the genre and took it to insane new heights, if you look at Linkin Park, they obviously did not stick with new metal and probably were never just purely new metal. There were so many other influences in what they were doing, which I know is a part of that genre. Anyways, my take here though about them, beyond all my personal ramblings and feelings about the band, is that we all know the impact they had on music and on rock and on the people who listen to them. It's obvious when you look at sales and concerts and their involvement in massive blockbuster movies like the original Transformers trilogy. Hybrid Theory is something like 16 or 17 times platinum at this point. It's quite insane. Anyways, I just don't see this ever happening again. Somebody coming along and having the kind of impact in the way that Linkin Park did, because their success is undeniable. And besides their talent, creativity, and all that, they hit at like a perfect inflection point. In the late 90s, early 2000s, things were shared and experienced in a vastly different way than they are now. You had top 40 radio, you might have rock radio and some other things, but for the most part, things were a lot more homogenized. When a song, half the time that I would hear Linkin Park on the radio when I was younger, it was on the top 40 stations. And there would be other rock bands of the era. There would be like Seether songs and other things like that would make top 40 playlists. You don't really get that today. Everything today is very, very subdivided. I mean, I'm not victim, but like I'm a perpetrator of that myself. I have Sirius XM in my car, and I almost exclusively listen to Octane, which is like new hard rock and metal with some older stuff thrown in there that matches the genre and what the people listen to. I almost exclusively listen to this. And then of course at home I almost exclusively listen to Linkin Park, other than like other similar bands. But I have no idea right now what's in top 40. I have zero idea or interest in what's going on in hip hop and rap. I was listening to country for a couple years there. I don't have a dislike for it, but I just haven't paid any attention to it, because when you have the ability to single out very specific genres and subgenres, you end up doing that. People create playlists and all that kind of stuff, and that's all they listen to. Very curated channels through Pandora or Spotify or listening to Sirius XM. We didn't have that back then. You listened to what you could get your hands on. You went and you bought cassettes and CDs, and people would share things that they liked, oh man, have you heard this band? And they hand you that cassette. It's not just sending a YouTube link to someone and they never click that link, or they listen to the first 30 seconds and are like, oh God, whatever, because they just don't have interest in the genre. Back then, you paid more attention to new things. It felt like you were more exposed to different things. We're talking the analog era. People still used payphones. They listened to regular FM radio, shared cassettes and CDs. The concerts and how the word got out about concerts and shows was much different than today. So Linkin Park really hit at a very, very different moment in history, where the way that they connected with people was very different. And of course, it launched with such you sold albums, you sold CDs and cassettes back then. You don't do that now. Everything now is literally just a YouTube video, a single on Spotify, or something playing on the radio. Rarely do you actually buy physical formats of things anymore. Rarely do you buy entire albums of things anymore. And so the way we consume media, the way that we share media, the way we go experience entertainment, like we still have shows and all that, but it's like I said, they connected at like a perfect inflection point in history for music, and I just think that you'll never see that happen again. There are big bands out there right now within the genre. I don't think we'll ever see another rock or metal or some variants of those genres that comes out and sells just tens of millions of copies for decades. I just don't think it's going to happen again. The times are very different now. So anyways, those are 3 takes. Hopefully not too long for y'all, and covers some interesting topics. If you agree or disagree, please leave a comment, let me know. And if you want to follow more of what I have to say, my Twitter is a little less censored than YouTube, and that's at Rival Indigo, of course. And then, of course, I also have Instagram, where I share other interesting things, what I'm collecting, and various other random image-related things over at Instagram, Rival Indigo. So I'll catch you next time.